we'll keep these fairly brief, but hopefully informative. So I have 3 questions that I provided the artists with in advance, so hopefully they've had some time to think about them. And the first question is, how, if at all, did the psychedelic era impact you and or your art production? Who would like to answer that? Anyone? Alex? There's a microphone there, just, yeah.
Hello. I think I mentioned earlier, when I was growing up, I was really into underground comics. I would go to head shops and magazine shops, and I really never consciously, took from, these artists' ideas and styles. But I think when I started doing mixed media drawings, I just loved the warm colors and psychedelic palette, and I still use that to this day. I think my caricatures, because I draw from memory, really kind of had that exaggeration that you see in a lot of the underground comic works. And like I said, we had rock posters, and I was totally into rock images and stuff. And I think those posters, I enjoyed going to blacklight shows, pretty much. But I didn't grow up in that, the psychedelic movement or period. But I think, I just appreciated the palette and the vibrance of the works back then.
Anyone else? Yeah, James.
Actually, it was really important to me too, and it was
Speak to the audience.
It was a period
Yeah.
when I was actually coming of age, and towards the end of high school and in early college was during that psychedelic period. And as Alex was talking about underground comics, they were really influential on me, and mostly in terms of the kind of the way nothing was sacred, and they were very iconoclastic, and they would all bets were off. They would attack all culture, it seemed to me, and Zap and Despair and Amputee Love, and a lot of these comics, I think, were really inspirational in terms of attitude. And in terms of imagery, I too was a huge fan of rock posters, Avalon Ballroom, handbills, Fillmore, Rick Griffin, Victor Moscoso. These artists were really influential to me, not so much in terms of imagery, but in terms of keeping me excited about doing art. I had always loved to draw, but these guys kept me sort of fascinated with it. And then the other side was the musical experimentation. Zappa, Beefheart, the extended jams of the Grateful Dead. That kind of experimentation I also found really exciting. So the whole psychedelic era was really important to me. I don't think it's particularly influential in terms of imagery or my own approach to anything, but in terms of the creative effort, the creative impulse of that period, it was really important to me.
Anyone else have a comment on that?
Yeah.
George?
I would say.
Oh, Mark.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah. Mark, then George.
Okay, is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. Like Jim, that was a fertile time in life. I was like kind of the residue of the summer of love filtering up the West Coast to where I lived in Oregon, and we were in high school, and we sort of became weekend hippies, where we would. There was this influence of the British invasion in music. That was a little later, but Carnaby Street, we started wearing wide wale corduroy pants and flowered shirts and things like that, and it was sort of it just wasn't a really great fit with the buzz cuts we had for football and stuff. But we on the weekends, beads and that sort of thing, and then the surfing craze and the Beach Boys and Jefferson Airplane. And I remember standing in the kitchen one time and talking about the Jefferson Airplane to my mother, and she said, "Well, you know what a Jefferson Airplane is, don't you?" And I said, "Well, of course, it's a band." She said, No, it's a roach clip." And I was floored that my mother knew what a roach was. But our high school dances had, there were a couple of kids that had found the best use of an overhead projector ever, a baking pan with some oil and colored water and that sort of thing, and these things projecting around and us doing our best to look hip. And but the posters, even our local high school bands were producing posters of the same ilk that are so memorable from that particular era. And like Jim, I don't know that it was terribly influential on my ideas about art particularly, but it certainly was. Every other aspect of our lives was sort of overshadowed by it.
George?
Well, San Antonio had an above table and below table reality during the psychedelic era. There was kind of the group of kids, Alamo Heights, Terrell Hills, that had a lot of disposable cash and used it wisely and shared their goods with those of us who didn't have the same disposable cash. And then there was that element of the West Side guys buying their stuff from the body bags that were being shipped into Kelly. And the fact that Brooks Air Force Base was a haven for CIA testing of pharmaceutical grade LSD. And so there were just like gray markets, black markets, above markets, below markets that were going on in San Antonio during that time. It was incredible. Love Street, Vulcan, up the road in Austin, the Vulcan, the amount of psychedelic music that was being produced here by the practitioners of the blues that were being imitated by the San Francisco bands. We were so much closer to the Mississippi Delta than San Francisco was. And there was stuff happening in San Antonio that was another DNA stream of the psychedelic movement. And it's kind of an underground world, the funk world. Some of us stumbled into it accidentally and others through conscious adventurism. But for me, the big thing where it all came together was Hemisphere. And kind of your Trinity heads, Trinity University heads, and your West Side heads, and your born-again economic development people who brought Hemisphere to San Antonio. And then these international types from all over the world that were here for 6 months. Hemisphere was really a psychedelic time. I mean, it was an amazing thing that went on there. My first real job was there in the AV department, doing light shows and running the sound systems for groups, and then 4 hours a day I was performing there. San Antonio, it was the first time I ever heard a synthesizer. Don Buchla came and gave this great demonstration. The bands that were in for during Hemisphere, I remember seeing Jimi Hendrix at the Municipal Auditorium. Opening act was Grand Vanilla Fudge and what's his name? Country Joe and the Catfish.
Country Joe and the Fish.
Fish, that's what it was. Yeah. Catfish is not bad. Anyway, and then everybody going over to Love Street afterwards, and where they played until like 3 a.m. And Love Street is now the Fairmont Hotel, when it used to be where Denny's is over there, But those were the kind of bands that were passing through here all the time. The 13th story elevators constantly. Sweet Smoke was another amazing band at the time. And then you had people like John Cage and people like Shigeko and Namjoon Paik coming through San Antonio and doing stuff. So I mean, this was a pretty amazing place. 68 through about 72. Things I'll
and it's still an amazing place, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But Connie, do you have anything to add?
Just quickly, that my first answer to your question when I first heard it was that it didn't have any bearing, but when I really reflected on it, because it was so much a part of my high school years in terms of the culture, I think that the whole possibility of irrationality or things that putting things together that wouldn't normally belong really became a real MO for the way that I make my work. But I was in Florida in high school. I was at Cape Canaveral with the First Moon launch, and there was so many things going on that I can't separate out one piece from all the things that came together in that era for all of us, I think.
Okay, my next question. How do you feel about living and working in San Antonio as opposed to one of the bigger art centers such as New York or Los Angeles? Do you see any advantages or disadvantages? Who would like to take that one? Well, I mean, everybody's got an opinion on it, right? Mark?
I've never lived in a big art center, so, but I think.
Have you ever wanted to?
Well, you know, I think as a young artist, I had aspirations for that at one time, and you know, life sort of gets in the way of, you know, your plans sometimes, and I don't think that I don't regret not doing that, and I certainly never thought I was going to end up in San Antonio for an art career, but it's worked out okay, I guess. But you know, at one point in my life, I thought that's what I wanted to do, but I don't see. I mean, I have friends that are doing that, and I think it depends on the individual, I guess. I don't know.
Alex?
I grew up here, and I think over the years I've traveled with the works, and I've exhibited in other states, and I always miss San Antonio actually when I'm traveling with a show, even if I'm in LA, you know, which is a lot of fun, you know. But sometimes after being there for a couple of weeks or months, I kind of feel like, you know, I miss home quite a bit. But I know that I do have this place to return to, and I have been able to make a living as a working artist, and being able to maintain a day job, which is working in nonprofit arts organizations, just allows me to work in my studio comfortably, you know, and be able to afford rent and pay for shipping. And most of the time, I have to ship the stuff myself. I load it in a U-Haul, and I love road trips, you know. It never bothers me that I had to drive so far through California and Arizona and New Mexico, but it's affordable to me, and I've never lived in a big art town like New York or LA, you know. I visit Vincent, you know, and I see that lifestyle, and I, you know, I'm amazed at the rents that they pay, and you know, but I think I'm comfortable here. I have all my friends and have a lot of students, and I think I can always pack up my work and hit the road, you know, and on one of my tours. And traveling exhibits, it makes it a lot easier. I've had 3 national touring exhibits, and that's really fun because they do all the work for me, you know. And I just have to fly in and enjoy the weekend and the opening. So I'm able to, you know, say, okay, I've had a lot of fun doing this, and I can still live comfortably.
Well, and actually, I want to open it up to the audience because we're running short on time. But my third question was really more an observation on the heels of what Alex is saying, that I think this is a really exciting time to be an artist in San Antonio. We have a really vibrant, thriving community, and I doubt any one of you would disagree with me with that. But I want to give the audience a chance to ask you their questions. So can we take some questions? Yes, Kathleen up in the front. Wait for the mic. The mic is coming.
Thank you. First, I want to say, well, you are one of the most exciting things that are happening now, David, in San Antonio.
Oh, thank you
for doing this. But I wanted to ask Mark, I saw in his early work the sort of distortion of the perspective and the play with that reminded me a lot of M.C. Escher. And then I thought, well, even though he was turn of the century, maybe he was the first psychedelic artist. And then I thought, and your latest work is very strong graphically, as his work was. So without the color, it's even more strong and vibrant. But I wanted to ask the other members of the panel too, if M.C. Escher was, or any of that turn of the century kind of quirky art, was that an inspiration in your work?
You know, a lot of I've been in a couple of magazines and books, and curators have always said, "Oh, you must be influenced by Vincent van Gogh," or and because of your texture. And I'm like, well, no, not really. I know this works, but I really never was influenced, where I never picked up a book, or I went to an opening, or went to a museum and saw the Van Gogh's work, for example, or Crumb's work, or in a magazine or a book. And I really never consciously picked up those types of techniques, or I never really tried to emulate their palettes, or I think what happened in my case was just something very natural. I think it happens with a lot of artists. It happens with a lot of students, especially at an early age, or an early stage, I should say, not age, but they do discover something about themselves, whether it was consciously, influenced by other artists, or maybe it's a pure, just natural sense of composition and color, And but I think a lot of people always try to find connections, especially with my texture, and my use of color. They're always like, "Oh, you must have been influenced by, Van Gogh, or God, I forget. There's so many different, artists." But yeah, sometimes it's very natural, and in my case, I think I try to do that.
Musicians find a lot of similarity when they're working with when they see an Escher print. We're doing that a lot. And when Bach does when he harmonizes an ascending chromatic scale, he's creating one of these Mobius strips, and that kind of reality goes deep, deep, deep. And when you see some of the pre-Columbian glyphs, and you see that they're dealing also with this interacting shadowing and coming in and out of each other, it's just kind of nice that there's a master in last century that was doing what was mastered maybe 3,000 or 4,000 years ago too. So anyway, yeah, Escher's pretty cool.
I just wanted to play off of something that Alex said, which is I think that all of those influences those are part of the air that you breathe as an artist. There's so much a part of history that you can't ignore it. I don't have any real interest in Escher at this point, but I think that time period was a real interesting one in terms of a lot of changes globally anyway, that he kind of maybe encapsulated in some way.
Another question over here.
This is a question for Mark. I couldn't help but feel that your work was a lot like graffiti, and I was wondering whether or not the graffiti that you see every day and doesn't affect you, it didn't affect your work, or any of the other artists for that matter.
Well, I've been asked that before, and it never really struck me as that's what I was doing. But when I see graffiti, particularly a couple places around town, that really quite entertaining, interesting, and well done, highly crafted, and so forth. And I think there's something I might think about, But I've never really had a direct connection to that. I think that whereas I think my work always sort of builds from a mass out, but never with these tendrils that seem to be sort of a hallmark of graffiti, in my estimation, anyway.
Okay, another question up front, right here.
It's another question for Mark. I just had just noticed when I was looking at your work that the colors were very bright and everything, and I really liked that. But as I kept looking, I noticed that you put texture in it. I was just wondering, is there a reason why you put texture? Because I thought they were pretty strong just with the color alone.
Yeah. Earlier on, I used a lot more textured surfaces just as a way of introducing another kind of contrast into the picture. And more recently, I've sort of gotten away from that and rely more just upon color and shape to carry, the day, so to speak. That way. Man, that's powerful.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Well, thank you all. Oh, did I miss one? All the way in the back.
Is that what's his name?
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys could talk about the show itself. I was struck by, it seemed to be more about illustrating some phenomena of drug response or psychedelic imaginings. Could you talk about creativity and this expression? No.
Larry, what exactly are you asking?
No, we're not holding, Larry.
Well, I mean, as the curator of the exhibition, I can tell you what I was focusing on in bringing this body of work together, and it was what I've defined as a psychedelic aesthetic sensibility characterized by very extreme color and spatial organization that tends to be kaleidoscopic or liquid. The kind of color and space that was introduced into our culture in the psychedelic era through lava lamps and the graphics of posters and whatnot. The point I was trying to make, I guess for some of us you had to have lived through the 1950s to really understand, which you did, to understand how radical a shift our sensibility of color and light and space changed in part as a result of the psychedelic era. And myself coming from an art history background and having studied modernism and the whole origins of abstraction and whatnot, it occurred to me, basically when I first saw the Frank Stella painting in his collection, that there really was a shift and that there's a stylistic bond. And yes, there are one or two artists in the exhibition who have acknowledged that their experiences with drugs of various sorts actually influenced their artwork, but as a whole, that was not the point of this exhibition. There already was an exhibition that addressed that called Ecstasy, which was curated at LA MoCA in Los Angeles. And there was also another show that was about the visual culture of the psychedelic era, organized by the Tate Liverpool, called Summer of Love. And what I've tried to do, whether you buy my thesis or not, is point out that in fact, we now have, it's a ubiquitous style, a ubiquitous sensibility that Webster's third definition of psychedelic is this kind of stylistic, a style that I've described. So as an art historian, I got very interested in how this emerged, evolved over time, and is currently very widespread in the work of artists who may not have anything in common with each other than this stylistic bond. So what I wanted to do was look into that, find out what that's all about. So I'm sure with each of these artists, they have a different place in that overall, how that sensibility is used and manifested, as you've seen. I mean, the work of Constance Lowe is very different from the work of Alex Rubio and Mark, and they're each very unique and very individual, and that's why we celebrate them all as artists. But they're also among the many artists today who make work that reveals this sensibility. So with an exhibition like this, hopefully we bring a lot of new issues to the forefront, and I guess I'll make a closing remark on that note, because two things that have become issues for me as a result of this exhibition that I had not thought much about in the work of contemporary artists is one, the healing potential of art, the fact that a lot of the work in this exhibition is uplifting and makes people feel good, and particularly when we talk about the optical work in the show, we start talking about visual energy and what happens in the retina of the viewer and all of that, which triggers in us a certain response that tends to make us feel good. And then there are artists in the show like Philip Taft, who I've quoted as saying that in fact that is the purpose of his art, is to try to induce in us a state of feeling transformed or transcended to some extent. So the healing potential. And then the other issue, which we touched on briefly, I think in George's part tonight, about the participatory aspect of art, or what I see as experiential, that in fact, when we think of Frank Stella, you know, he didn't see himself as being an op artist. He wasn't an op artist. He made a work that was very optical, as it turns out, and that's what gave birth to this show. This work, it's work that we participate in. And again, going back to what the op artists were really trying to do was to make art that affected the viewer in a certain way, and it was about the viewer, not about the object. So art that has healing potential, art that is experiential or participatory, there could be some more shows in those ideas. So anyway, for me as a curator, that's what I've come away from, is some new ideas, and hopefully that's what that art does for us. And I thank all these amazing artists for being with us tonight, and thank you all for joining us as well. Okay.